Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Horse Geeks podcast. This is episode 8. Yes, episode 8. I am Kirsten Nelsen, professional horse trainer for Wexford Training and developer of the program Training for Optimal Balance, which is for horses and riders. And with me is Deb Cooper, who is an orthopedic massage therapist, as well as a certified Alexander Technique instructor, and her business is called Optimal Posture. So today's topic, usually we have our topic like well laid out. And we could not decide exactly on what to call this topic. So what we want to cover today, we played with the idea of learning how to learn, kind of reconnecting to our innate intelligence or our body intelligence, or overcoming our fear of making mistakes. So those are kind of the topics we're going to cover. We might come up with a title for this podcast by the end of the podcast.
We're open to suggestions.
Yes, you can leave your suggestions in the comment section. Or any topics you would like to hear. If you have questions, we're always open to that in the comment section. So what kind of brought about this particular conversation was in our last podcast, I was talking about how the hands-on work I received as an Alexander Technique student was really eye-opening to me, that it awakened something in my nervous system that made my own use and coordination of my body change in a way that I never before had realized was available to me. So the blueprint is inside everybody's body, but the teacher, through a nonverbal communication, just with the kind of hands-on, was able to kind of awaken a part of my nervous system where I didn't realize I was holding tension in certain places, or I could rearrange my skeleton in another place. That gave me a great sense of relief, more comfort, and some efficiency of motion compared to other techniques. And that's what's so hard, I think, to explain about the Alexander technique.
It's very hard.
Like a massage or body work or chiropractic or physical therapy, because the communication received from the instructor's hands isn't really directive, or I don't want to use the word manipulative because that has kind of a negative connotation, but nobody positioned or repositioned my body. It was a transmission of information through touch, but very different than a massage therapist who's going to actually kind of roll my muscles and move me around, or a physical therapist who's going to make sure my joints have the proper range of motion, or a chiropractor who's going to go in and change my skeleton. So that's what's always been hard to explain about the Alexander technique. And that sort of led to our conversation of, well, I would not have come across that information just working with my internal loop of experience, right? So that was my limitation, just based on my life experience within my own body. So the hands of the Alexander Technique instructor, I thought of it as giving me new information to my nervous system. But if we break that down a little bit, I want to say that's maybe not 100% accurate. I would say it woke something up that was already in there, would be a better description. And that's how I look at teaching, whether I'm developing skills with a horse or helping a horse owner as a student. It's kind of the same for me, that I believe that there's this innate blueprint of intelligence, or I believe in the intelligence of the individual. And I'm there to just sort of guide towards maybe a more efficient, comfortable, or safer use or coordination of the body that they might not be fully conscious of yet, but I know it lives inside there somewhere. I have to sort of dig it out as a teacher.
Yeah, yeah, it's having, sometimes I use the words like redoing your internal map, giving you different directions of ways of looking at things or going. And like you said, and it's probably the same with horses, it's probably never the same. You may try certain ways, but each individual body has its own body schema. So to go in and change that internal map that we've created, because, over the years, as you were saying, we were talking about adult riders, we can change that roadmap, whether it's through, any kind of trauma, emotional, physical, psychological. All of those things are kept in this organism, and I would assume it's the same thing with a horse. I'm not completely sure, but to get through those layers of information.
I find it has nothing to do with age at all. Age doesn't really play a factor in whether we're still capable of learning or changing habits.
I agree with that. Yeah.
That's available. And I get asked that question a lot, like, is my horse too old to change, or I'm too old to change, or I have all of these, fill in the blank, issues, pain issues, disabilities, broken this, broken that.
And I wonder because I wonder what the horse brings to the table with that thought.
The horses have very good memories, but they don't have a large capacity of thinking into the future or imagination in the structure of their brain. So if something in their past created pain or fear in a severe way, then every time you go back to that same situation, the memory of the pain or the fear is incredibly strong in the horse. They assume it's going to be the same until they have very specifically, in the exact same context, like say it's mounting, right? And the first time they were mounted, they got really scared with a rider on their back, or they had an issue like kissing spine, and so they had a pain reaction. Right? So then all of a sudden they become more and more defensive about having a rider get on at the mounting block. And that can keep escalating to the point that you can no longer get on them. They won't stand still at the mounting block. They panic a little bit as soon as the rider gets on. Sometimes, even if you address the pain issue and you fix that with medication, injections, therapies, whatever, the memory of that is still so strong in the horse, you'll get the same behavior until you literally work through it in the very context of a rider getting on their back at the mounting block, because that's where the memory took hold.
And I can, for me, it always comes up in trailer loading. That's a big deal.
Right.
Big deal.
And so the memory can be quite strong, but what is so different between a rider and a horse is the rider has a huge capacity for imagination. So, and also a very good memory. So it's like after people maybe have a bad fall off of a horse, part of what gets in the way of getting back on the horse is not only the memory of all that fear and pain that came with falling off the horse, but humans will imagine that will happen again and again. So
we'll project it. Yeah, we'll project.
Where horses, as soon as they work through the same experience with a level of safety and comfort, they let it go. It's done. It's over. You don't have to keep revisiting the same issue because you've now added a new memory, which the feeling of safety and comfort is always going to be chosen by a horse over the feeling of fear or discomfort or pain. So even if the memory is quite strong, horses are very logical. If they have a different experience, they might become wary of the situation because they have both experiences. but they're not going to hang on to the bad experience once they have the good experience. They're willing to change and trust that there will be a good deal.
And I think we've talked about this before. The good experience, a description like for a person would be, like you were saying, it's tapping into that central nervous system and finding the safety and the calm that they need biomechanically to move forward.
Right, which it kind of brings us around to the topic or the title for this podcast. One of the things I had written down was overcoming our fear of making mistakes. And I go, that is one of the most crippling and unspoken problems across the board for adult learners. And sort of like what we're talking about with the horses, when we go through school and just our normal grading system, A through F, right? There's an unspoken sort of conditioning that making mistakes, if you make a mistake on a test, you get your grade reduced. And if you make enough mistakes, you fail the test. If you fail the test and you get an F, that can oftentimes become part of our identity. And so there's a lot of pressure when we're in the school system. And this is not to bash the grading system or the school system. It's just what I found as an explanation for why we become a little bit frozen about making mistakes. We're always trying to do it right. We want to know the right position, the right way to tell the horse, the right way to train. And when it comes to bodies or individuals, there is no single right way. There are principles and understanding, but there's not a right way to go about it with every single individual horse or human. But what I find is it's so deep within our psyche. I don't think we always know it's there. It comes out in different ways. But that fear of making mistakes, because if we made mistakes in the course of going through school at any level of education, you're sort of punished in a way for not having the one right answer or the right answer that the teacher is trying to pull back out of you. So our perception of learning becomes we receive new information, and if we're good at spitting it back out in the right way at the right time, we get a good grade, and that therefore means we're intelligent and we're smart.
Oh, that's scary.
I think that has to do with it.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Right? But that's sort of unspoken message of the grading system. So if you don't remember the right answer or you don't produce it at the right time, there can become a big belief that making mistakes can be painful, that we're thought of as less than intelligent if we don't get good grades in school. And so that becomes a huge crippling belief that isn't even talked about with adults learning new skills, especially when it comes to learning new body coordinations, like learning to use your body in a different way. That fear of making a mistake, I find, is deeply ingrained in people. And it comes out sideways as the need to control, the searching for the best riding instructor or the person who has all the right answers, who's winning or proving themselves or whatever, rather than just really going to the more intuitive side of it and listening to your horse, even trusting your own body as to what you feel versus what you read in a book or what somebody told you. There is an intelligence that we can tap into, and that's really the intelligence that allows us to develop a relationship with the horse, a dialogue back and forth, and trust our own development, develop our own skills through trial and error. We have to be willing to make mistakes in order to learn.
And I'm wondering, I love that word dialogue, because that means there's a conversation.
Yes.
And I'm wondering if that is what the thing is. If we get it stuck in our head that it has to be right or wrong, this way or that way, instead of saying it's just a conversation. We're just having a conversation.
Right.
Let's see where we go.
Exactly. Like us sitting down on Zoom or you and I having coffee, there's no right or wrong way for us to have a conversation. It's just a back and forth sharing of ideas. Or when you're putting hands on me as an Alexander instructor, there's information you could share with me in a nonverbal way. I might get it, I might not. So you might tweak how you communicate that. That's what I'm doing with horses all day, every day. Have they received what I've intended to communicate to them? Yes or no. That doesn't make them right or wrong. It's just, do I need to change my approach? Do I need to say it in a different way? If I want to share information back and forth, I also have to listen as much as I talk.
Yeah, and I think that's the key difference between being a body worker, and I also taught at massage school I was the head instructor at a massage school for 2 years. And there is usually no dialogue. You're in that, you know what I mean? I never considered it a dialogue between me and the client. Maybe it was a dialogue between me and the client's body, but it was never, and I tried to teach that just because you have a pain here in the left side of your neck doesn't mean you go there to fix it. You know, that doesn't necessarily mean that's where the problem is. That's where the pain is, but what's the cause? And I think that's where maybe Alexander teachers are having a dialogue with the body schema in the person's body to say, well, how do I help you find a better organization?
Right.
And it's not A, B, C, D, do it this way, and you get the answer. And I feel it's the same way with horses.
Absolutely. And it's really a pretty ingrained belief system that not only the teacher, but a professional has the ideal in their mind, which is true. But like if say a massage therapist or a chiropractor comes at my body with this ideal, right? They're going to bypass my consciousness of how I manage my own habit of movement, number one. And they're going to try to sort of guide the body. And again, the word that comes to mind is manipulate, but I don't mean that in a negative sense. There's a place for it, you know, absolutely.
Oh, I agree.
Massage or chiropractic. The point is, it's sort of done to the body.
Yes.
The body is passive. And, you know, these knowledgeable hands are putting information in there to remind the body this is what correct is. But because the body receiving it is passive, the old habit, which is the habit is a neural pathway, right?
Exactly.
It shows that our neural pathway, which can be a super highway by the time we're adults, says this is how we move. That's our habit. We call it muscle memory or whatever. But that's why a lot of those more kind of approaches like body work don't stick, because the nervous system is kind of bypassed. It happens faster than the nervous system can adapt. So the default is the strongest habit. So you go to the chiropractor and a week later, you're back in pain, you go back to the chiropractor. So you keep having to go back for your body to be put in this ideal, but your nervous system is still trained away from that ideal. And
I feel I'm not, like you said, to me, there's no dialogue there.
Right.
The dialogue is missing. And, you know, I feel the dialogue of asking questions constantly about, even I'm constantly asking questions when I'm writing about my use, and am I using myself to the best of my ability in that situation? So I'm always checking in.
Absolutely. And it came up with a client last week because she had a great body worker work on her horse. And she called me because she felt after the body worker did the work, the horse was better in some ways, but worse in others. And when she described it to me, some of the usual tight spots in her horse felt more fluid and unlocked. But she goes, it felt like my horse was all over the place, like walking like a drunk sailor. And I go, well, that's the side effect of having body work where it's done to you or to the horse. The side effect is going to be instability because the nervous system hasn't caught up with what just happened to the body. And it's not a bad thing. I just explained to her, I said, it's a window of opportunity to then guide the horse to their best possible use. Now that everything's all loose and you've broken a habit of the nervous system, you have a short window of opportunity to guide the body towards the best use and gain the stability in the new use. But I go, you have to know where you're going to be able to do that. And that to me was my experience between, say, chiropractic or massage versus the Alexander technique. The Alexander technique brings my nervous system along with it. So it's slower, but it's much more integrated. And that's how I find you get lasting changes in the mechanical use of the body, is the nervous system has to have this new pathway related to the habit of use and movement. And like you said, we can work on it all the time, just being conscious.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah, and that same thing, to be open and available to new information, or to me, the opposite of that is that fear of failure, or that, am I doing it right? Am I doing it right? And, or that there's always a place, you're an end game thing, which is huge in the Alexander community, that I'm going to do ABCD and it's going to equal this.
You're going to go through this equation and it's going to give you the result.
Exactly. The end result is, the goal, the end result, where, this, to me, riding and the Alexander technique are just perpetual. It's just constantly going and moving and
constant learning.
Oh, I like that one. Yeah.
It's constant learning, and it's small adaptations because the body and the nervous system are kind of moving and learning together. And I find that if we try to bypass the nervous system, it ends up setting us backwards because the body will resort to instinctual use if it gets too unstable or is too unfamiliar.
Yeah, that's when I start to see, and maybe all those words we used, freezing, you think the information isn't getting to the student, but maybe they're just frozen, whether it's psychological or physically, they're locking down. They can't, once they lock a muscle, there's no information getting to that muscle or joint. So, that the fear of failing or falling or whatever the fear is can really be debilitating.
No, and I find the fear of making mistakes is as debilitating as the fear of just getting on a horse for the first time, or the fear of getting back on a horse after you've had a bad accident. Those fears have equal importance inside of the body of the rider.
Yeah, I remember when I started riding when I was 6, and my first riding instructor was from Germany. And every riding lesson, I'd go home crying. I was just like, was so mean. But I kept going back for more. I don't know why.
Do you think that affected you as an adult learner?
You know what? I wonder if that I just wonder how people receive information. Like, are we giving the information to them in a way that they can understand it? Maybe it egged me on. Maybe it made me just put up a big wall. I don't know.
Right.
But I kept going. But I wonder about that. And we've talked about this before, that you and I are always searching for. I feel it's always my responsibility as a teacher to use whatever I have to get that information to that student. It's not just one way. If they don't understand, it's up to me to figure out how to communicate what I'm trying to say to them. I have to change something.
Or sometimes it's our horses telling us that too.
Oh, I agree.
Because I would say one of the things you and I have in common, our inner joke, is that we're from the same litter of Jack Russells. Like, that is just kind of the jumper personality. Those of us that love jumping. And we had a similar path in that that quit working.
It definitely quit working.
And it quit working because of the horses that we both owned. The horses we both owned were just not going to have that. And it was getting dangerous, or if not dangerous, frustrating, that you're just running into the same brick wall over and over with your horse, not making progress. And that's the horse calling us to change, calling us to say, look, you might be getting a lot of human feedback that you're on the right track, but I'm here to tell you, it's not working for me. Right? This is not working for me. And if we're afraid of making mistakes, which I never realized. I read a book years ago by Robert Kiyosaki, and it was one of his early books called "If You Want to Be Rich and Happy, Don't Go to School," with a question mark. And when I first read the book, I thought, man, this guy's really complaining a lot about the school system. And somewhere in that book, I went, oh my God, I have that inside of me. I never realized. I just took for granted that there's one right answer, there's a right way to do something, and if I don't cut the mustard, I fail. And that was really crippling my progress as a writer or owning my own business. Those are very creative endeavors. And the only way to be successful, especially with horses, is to be willing to make mistakes and explore territory that you have never explored before. But that takes a certain amount of self-confidence and fortitude, or, as in your case, in my case, desperation. I go, okay, I finally ran into the same wall enough times.
Bam, bam, bam.
Willing to try something different, right? And out of, loving my horses, but having problems with them, I was just telling somebody the other day, when I was 16 and I was having a problem with the first horse I ever owned, I took the horse to 3 different trainers. The horse was bucking me off regularly, bolting with me through some pretty serious leverage bits. And I was like, okay, this is getting unfun.
Unfun.
Not fun anymore, right? So I went and looked for help with trainers, and I got the same advice as a 16-year-old that I still hear today. You're a very good rider, dear. What you need is a better horse. And
wow.
It pissed me off then, and it pisses me off now, that I'm like, look, this is the horse I have. He's the right color. He's the right breed. That's how 16-year-olds think. But I'm having problems. Help me with this horse. And that was probably the germination of me wanting to know about horses more and take the path of horse trainer, because that made me so angry that I was like, it wasn't financially an option for me when I was 16, or my parents. And I liked my horse. I loved my horse. He was the horse I picked out myself. I didn't want to get rid of him. And so that, frustrating experience was the beginning of me, butting my head against the wall. I did my best with him, but he was definitely getting the better of me.
Yeah, so I wonder, goes back to that perpetual learner mentality that we have, because I'm always searching for, and maybe it's the intuitiveness. I don't know what you said, the inner knowledge. I always question. I'm always questioning.
Mhm.
There's got to be more. There's just got to be more information. We just don't know it. We haven't found it. But I'm always looking.
And I think that's what I see when I say overcoming the fear of making mistakes. Is what we tend to do is, if things are going badly, the first thing, at least most women, start to beat themselves up, right? And then there's that whole philosophy of the horse is perfect, the human has to learn. Okay, it's not wrong. We're supposed to be the higher intelligence. Let's just take it that way. So we're supposed to be better about thinking into the future, having better strategies, but that doesn't always mean we have the right answer over the horse. Sometimes the horse has the better answer, right? But it's like taking that blame is part of the fear of making mistakes. Beating yourself up and thinking you're stupid, it doesn't help. I just go, what was it Jean-Luc said? He goes, committing suicide isn't going to make you ride any better tomorrow. You may as well just put it which was saying, don't beat yourself up, but learn from it. But trusting that there is an intelligence that the horse brings to the table, that they are capable of learning. As riders, we might be the guides for the horses, but that doesn't mean we always have the best answer or the right answer for any given situation. And as a teacher to other people, I approach it the same way. I believe if somebody is successful enough in their life to own a horse, they're obviously intelligent enough to learn. They might not know the coordination of riding or everything there is to learn about horses, but the lack of knowledge doesn't equal a lack of intelligence. The intelligence, I think, is innate. Knowledge is what we sort of add to it, or skill or coordination is what we add to the inner intelligence. And I think we were actually looking up stuff. I don't know that it's appropriate to talk about in this podcast, but like the Socratic method of teaching, there's a lot. You guys can Google it if you want to look it up. But Socrates, who is around 350 to 399 BC, one of the original classical Greek philosophers, his method of teaching was through asking questions. So you guys can Google the Socratic Method. There's an example written by Plato called the Meno, Meno. And it's really fascinating because the Meno starts off with sort of a conversation about, can you teach virtue, or is that innate? And I think that question still kind of goes unanswered. But right. Socrates' method of teaching was through asking questions. So, like, the abridged version is, he believed in the inner intelligence of the individual, and his job as a teacher was to ask questions in a way that drew out the knowledge, not to think of putting the knowledge in. And this is
I think that's key. I think you've tapped into that. What's kind of what we do is we want to draw out, and I think that helps to build confidence in the horse.
And I would say with horses as much as people.
Yeah.
Learning Like, change is scary and learning is hard. Okay, just accept it. Change is scary, learning is hard. That's a whole podcast into itself. I think we should talk about it. But if you go, okay, I'm going to change, and because I want to change, I have to accept the fact I'm going to make mistakes. Or while I'm learning, I'm going to make mistakes. I'm going to look like an idiot before I figure this out. That's just part of the deal. And a good teacher is going to guide by helping draw out the intelligence so that you have it, so that we have experiential learning, not just a mental learning. At least with writing, it's got to be an experiential light bulb moment where the words suddenly translate into an action or a feeling or a sensation. And that's where that light bulb moment only happens through a dialogue, because I need to know if what I'm trying to share is being received, whether it's the student or the horse. And they give me feedback, maybe asking me questions, or as the guider in that situation, I have to keep asking questions until I see what is it they're understanding. Oh, and I wrote something down when I was Googling some of this stuff. This was a quote from Rick Reese, who was at Stanford University, on the Socratic Method. And I thought this was really well said. The Socratic professor aims for productive discomfort, not pain and intimidation. Right? So he says the aim is not to strike fear in the hearts of students so that they come to class better prepared with the right answer.
I share with people, I call it growing pains.
Growing pains, but I loved that, productive discomfort. I go, that is change, that is learning, that's what it feels like to make mistakes and be the idiot in the room while you're learning. And horses don't have that kind of ego about it. If they do something silly, I mean, they trip in the pasture, they shake it off they go. They don't think about it twice, like, ooh, Prima saw me stumble. She might make fun of me at dinner time when we're all in the stall, right? They just don't think that way. So we can learn a lot from that about how to just let the mistakes roll off our back and keep going.
Yes.
That phrase, productive discomfort, I went, that is such a great phrase of the dialogue, whether it's a nonverbal dialogue between me and the horse, or of actual verbal dialogue in any language between me and another human. To really, learn something new, there's that state of discomfort, not pain and not fear, but a little bit of discomfort that's facilitating the search for something more efficient, something more comfortable, something a little bit better.
Yeah, and I think it helps to, and maybe I don't verbally acknowledge it, but I acknowledge it within myself, because I think that thought, the fear of failure, also brings on a physical response. And so I acknowledge, yeah, I'm having a little fear around this right now, and that's okay.
And the fear of making mistakes, the fear of failure, we can have external forces like a horse bucking, rearing, bolting, that is a genuine force of nature. It's a physical force that can land us on our head, our ass, our arm, whatever. We risk injury when we ride. We all understand that. But the fear of making mistakes, I go, when people feel that internally, which is really a mental fear, right? Mental, emotional thing. It's not a physical force against your body. But what I find interesting is it has a physical reality in the body. So the fear of making mistakes can generate the fight, flight, freeze, or fawn response, just like a real, tangible, falling off the horse kind of fear. I go, so that's why it's so debilitating, is instead of just saying, I'm afraid of making mistakes, or I don't know, or those moments where we have to be humble. Like that fear of mistake can come out sideways as being aggressive towards a horse, being over controlling of the horse. Maybe a lot of people avoiding, like you get to the barn to ride, but you're a little bit worried about getting on your horse and you're afraid of looking stupid or afraid of asking questions. And so you find everything else to do except ride. Right? So that's kind of a flight response. It's an avoidance behavior. Or I'll see a lot of times if the horse does something unexpected while the rider is on, freezing, becoming passive, and then going, why is the horse doing this to me?
Yes.
And I go, the horse is just being a horse, protecting itself, right? But that freeze response I'll see, and that again can just be the fear of making mistakes, can make a really tense rider because they're so afraid of doing it wrong that they literally freeze in the saddle and have excessive muscle tension. They're either too aggressive or too passive, rather than having that dialogue, that ongoing back and forth between the aids and the contacts that makes that nonverbal dialogue.
Yeah, I like it when you always say we have conversations, and most of our conversations with our horses is no, not that, and no, not that, and nope, not quite. Oh, you're getting warmer.
Yeah, yeah. That is actually all the aids when we talk about the leg aid, seat aid, rein aids, how with whatever leverage or lack of leverage you want to add to that. That's really what we're saying by giving a physical resistance is not that way, not that way, no, not that, no, not that. So if you're always overusing the aids, where is the right answer for the horse? Like, where do they get the comfort or the sense of, I got the right answer? Right. So a horse can develop a fear of making mistakes from having an overcritical rider. The same way people do from having an overcritical teacher. You just are almost paralyzed. You can't do anything because you're so afraid you're going to get punished. And whether that's mental, emotional punishment of being ostracized, made fun of, called stupid, or a physical repercussion, right? Either way, the force, the energy of fear makes our body respond the same, whether it's a mental, emotional, or physical cause.
Yeah, because the thought always comes before the action. So if we're not controlling our thinking, our body's going to respond to whatever we're thinking. So I remember it was the first semester of Alexander School. We were asked to write down for a solid week, write down every subconscious thought that came up.
Oh, ouch.
And if you want to do that, that's a very fun activity, but you wouldn't believe how much subconscious conversations you're having in your head.
Yes. And that's what Robert Kiyosaki's book really woke up in me was I didn't even realize I believed that, but I recognized that I was operating out of that belief quite a bit, that I was afraid of making mistakes. And by sort of embracing that or acknowledging that and going, well, when I'm afraid of making mistake, could I just become curious and maybe change my approach rather than reacting to the fact that I'm probably going to make mistakes? I just assume I am. And if it comes out good, I learned something.
So I wonder if the fear of failure sets you up for failure.
Absolutely. And that's kind of what I like about the idea of saying we're having a conversation with our horse. There's no wrong way to do that. So if the horse doesn't quite have accurate steering, maybe that's what the conversation becomes about. How could I help you with this rather than you're working against me? Like instead of setting it up as an argument, when it's a dialogue, you go, okay, the horse chose this, but I don't have to label that as good or bad, right or wrong. I can just look at it and go, what is the horse communicating to me? And the same thing with me in the saddle. I go, oh man, my ankles are killing me. Maybe I'm putting too much pressure in one area of my body. Maybe I could redistribute that. Right. So I don't have to blame myself for jamming my heels down as an old ingrained habit. But maybe that little bit of soreness in my ankles alerts me to go, hey, maybe you could make another choice. Why don't you explore a little bit?
Yeah, I like that. Explore, dialogue, having choices, all of those things need to be more in the horse world, and the way we communicate with each other and with the horses.
Yeah. And some of my favorite rides at home with nobody around, no spectators, commentators, was just me literally sort of almost being a passenger on the horse at times. And just at the walk, mooching around, having no particular agenda for a ride, really opened my eyes to how much communication the horse is willing to have with you when you're not constantly setting the agenda and saying, this is
Yeah.
what we're going to do. So it was like taking the scenic route and leisurely driving along rather than on the super highway of where I wanted to go, which was very different for me. But huge epiphanies of just going, what would we talk about if I opened my mind to the ride being a conversation instead of an agenda of things we have to achieve?
Or what would we talk about if we as riders just shut up?
Exactly. That's what I spent my time doing, was just, right?
Just going, okay, what have I got here? What can you tell me about you?
Right.
Tell me what's going on with you today.
Right. And for some horses, what was so interesting was they would all respond differently. Some horses freaked out with a lack of guidance. They couldn't handle it. They were like,
Plumley did.
what are
Plumley did, yeah.
you doing up there? I have no guidance. My pilot has obviously parachuted out of the plane. I don't know what I'm doing. And so that instantly told me much more about that horse. They want the guidance. That's a horse that wants the aids, but in that conversation between aids and contacts, just because I don't want to make that individual dependent on me for everything either, because I'm never, ever, no human is ever going to create mechanically correct function inside a horse better than the horse will do for itself. There's no way a human can make a horse move better than the horse can internally figure out for themselves. And so I have to have that conversation and that process of discovery within the horse to truly get mechanically good use.
And that's interesting what you said about, and I know in the past when I was showing competitively, I had an off the track thoroughbred, and I was constantly trying to micromanage him, and he would always buck me off.
That was my first horse.
Then I had to go to my brother's college graduation, and I missed like the biggest horse show. So my friend said, "Oh, I'll take him and show him." And she won everything on him because she just sits there and says, "Okay, whatever you want, we'll go and do." And I went, "Wow."
Yeah.
And then I have another horse who, when you don't give him parameters, he totally freaks out and runs away.
Absolutely.
So you never know what their needs are.
And that is the horse's opinion. Like, that's their own intelligence. That's them telling you, I don't like one of those super grippy handshakes. I like a soft handshake, right? Maybe they like a super grippy handshake. Maybe they like the guidance. Maybe they don't like the guidance. So you can't say riding on a loose rein is kinder to every horse than riding with a rein contact that's actively helping the horse balance. You can't say one is better than the other. Right. And that was, my first horse. He was 30 days off the track. I had no idea what I was in for. And a big part of the problem was me being too passive and then not going from too passive to too active. and nothing in between,
Right.
which drove my poor horse crazy. Right. But then with a good rider, I finally found a friend of my dad's who had a lot of experience, and she rode him beautifully. He was great for her. He was my worst nightmare, but I knew he was a good horse and I loved him. She rode him beautifully. And I ended up selling him to her because he was better off with her than me. I saw that at the time. But I became determined to learn more because I went, the human is part of the equation when the same horse goes better for somebody else than it does for you.
Exactly.
Yeah, not to blame the human, but it's like, let's step it up a notch, because obviously it doesn't even mean that rider has better riding skills. Sometimes it's just a better energetic match. Or like you said, they either give no guidance or little guidance to a horse that doesn't want it, or they're more active with the horse who does want it. So, and that's where we have to experiment, especially when it's nonverbal communication. So in that process, non-verbally, you're going to say the wrong thing. You're going to mess up. You're not going to get it right away. You have to be willing to step into that productive discomfort.
Yes.
I love that. I'm like, productive, that is the Socratic method. That is the process of having a dialogue between you and the horse in a nonverbal way. And if as long as we're afraid of doing it wrong, we're never really going to get good.
We're pretty frozen, I think.
We're pretty frozen by that belief.
By that thought.
Yeah. I should say that fear.
Yeah.
So I think that'll be the title, if you're good with it. The title for this podcast will be Overcoming Our Fear of Making Mistakes. It's a good working title. We'll go with that. So thank you guys for joining us. Hopefully you feel free to comment, feel free to subscribe. We will carry on with the podcast. And if you have topics you'd like to hear discussed or questions, feel free to put that in the comments as well. Okay, but thank you for joining us for another podcast.
Thank you.
All right.
Be kind.
Bye.